The Naturalman podcast is intended as general information for educational purposes only and should not be construed as medical advice or a diagnosis of any kind or as a substitute for medical treatment. The information provided in this podcast is not meant to replace the advice of or treatment by any physician. Do not rely upon any information to replace consultations or advice received by qualified health professionals regarding your own specific situation. If you suspect that you have a medical problem, you are urged to seek competent medical help. The Naturalman podcast and its representatives and agents disclaim any liability for any negative or other medical or other outcomes that may occur as a result of acting on or not acting on any information contained in the podcast. The views and opinions expressed by the host and all guests are their own, and their appearance on this podcast and at the website of the Naturalman podcast does not imply any endorsement of them or any entity they represent and does not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the Naturalman podcast.
This is the Naturalman podcast.
This is it. Welcome to it, the Naturalman podcast. My name is Mike C. And Julia Ross, so glad you're able to join us today. Thanks for being here.
You're welcome, Mike. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, you're a best-selling author. You're a nutrient therapy pioneer. You're a world leader in the use of nutritional therapy for the treatment of mood problems, eating disorders, addictions. For 10 years, you worked as a psychotherapist in different settings of psychiatric and outpatient facilities. And from there, you started directing programs. And these are some things I'm going to want to dive into today. You created a program that effectively offered nutritional alternatives to antidepressant drugs. And you have an insomnia eradication program that's based on your own extensive research into the underlying causes of insomnia. And I don't think there's enough research in that area. So I really appreciate people like yourself doing this work. Thanks for being here. Your background's awesome, and I'm excited that you're here. Now, you've been the clinical director at several clinics in helping those with compulsive eating and chemical dependencies in the San Francisco Bay Area, right? And in that time, you've literally helped thousands of chronic insomniacs. And we both know insomnia is such a huge problem today. Talk about that. Like, why is this condition affecting so many people?
Well, there are two directions that this tsunami is coming at us from. And one of them has to do with the profound worldwide dietary trauma that's being inflicted on humankind by the refined food industry, which has created, just untold issues in terms of malnutrition. And with every generation, it gets worse because, mothers are not fully prepared to pass on, their best selves. And so it's just been getting worse. And, I can track it back to the 1970s when the enormous change in our diet took place and then quickly spread worldwide. So we have, we're suffering from malnutrition because the kinds of foods we've been addicted to by the food industry are virtually, the research shows, international research showing that this food is 60% nutrient void.
Wow.
And so the nutrients that are required to get us to sleep, there are lots of them. They're required in, good amounts to get us to sleep, to make us happy. And so that gets us to the second wave that underlies insomnia, and that is our stress levels have risen dramatically, partly because we're eating the most stressful diet ever known, but also because of increased population, the environment, unknown toxic exposure. So we're dealing with malnutrition in the face of levels of stress that are pretty unprecedented, and we just don't have the resources to deal with it, and so the adrenals are front and center, trying to field the stress coming from lots of different directions. And that means that our cortisol levels, cortisol is a hero, that it's perhaps our greatest hero. In the face of stress, it makes us feel strong and resourceful. It gets us through. So it's not an enemy. It's not like adrenaline that just jangles us and alerts us to the fact that we're in trouble.
Right.
But cortisol, allows us to stand and fight, or think of alternatives, find a tree to climb, and so it's called to action, so greatly now, and chronically. It used to, just be an emergency resource, and now we've got daily demands for it. And so levels in general have gone up. And what happens when cortisol levels rise consistently daily for more than 3 weeks is that a new standard is established, and the body thinks it's, this is it. We're supposed to be sending out previously levels of cortisol that would have been considered overdose on a regular basis.
Right.
And at a certain point, that can't go on. The adrenals just can't keep providing it. And, so there's cortisol steal, other hormones, levels diminish so that there can be resources to make more cortisol, and that doesn't work permanently either. So we got to a point where actually the cortisol levels crash. And when I describe this to you, I'm talking about the most remarkable testing, salivary cortisol testing, so easy to access, so reasonably priced, and really the queen of all testing in terms of cortisol. Universities, when they're doing studies of stress, use salivary testing. So we've been able to see people's cortisol levels all day and all night. And what we've learned is that once they get to the point where they're not producing much cortisol during the day, on a chronic basis, they're still hyper-producing cortisol at night.
So is that like a fixed thing where when we get into this hyper-stressed state, you said for 3 weeks, and it just continues, do our adrenal glands just perpetually keep making that level? Like, is that the new standard within our bodies? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Wow.
It's the new standard for as long as it can be sustained. And for different people, they're wandering around with, sky-high cortisol day and night and really functioning remarkably well, but they don't sleep well because cortisol levels are high at night too. And when you think about some of the most extreme stress states, we're all familiar with, emergency situations, a sudden divorce, custody battles, that kind of thing where you can't eat and you can't sleep. Those are typical with elevated cortisol. And I learned about that working with anorectics, who always have elevated cortisol. That's how they keep going.
Really?
Yes, because not only does cortisol give them energy that's independent of what they eat, but it actually burns up their flesh in order to keep them going. So that's part of its emergency power, is to use our own bodies as fuel, in times of starvation.
So when our cortisol levels remain heightened for an extended period of time, the way you're describing, eventually our adrenal glands run out of fuel. And so what is the understanding? Is it that we our bodies will stop making as much, and so we'll just have a weakened stress response, and our cortisol will actually be lower. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. Yes, it goes down, pretty quickly, actually, when it gets to that point to subnormal levels where we can't handle any stress. Or, I'm thinking of someone who came to us who had been, some kind of a internet mogul, venture capital,
Yeah.
whatever. And she burned herself out, high cortisol until it dropped, and then it dropped to a point where she couldn't function, and she ended up in the Bahamas cooking on a tourist boat, about as stressless a life as she could find. And, a small boat, a yacht, with just a few souls on it for each trip. At any rate, her cortisols were subnormal all day long, but as with so many people in this common scenario now, her cortisol levels at night were still elevated.
Wow. So she couldn't get to sleep.
No. So she couldn't recover. All she could do is stay doing the minimum possible things to survive. And so it was great to be able to restore a normal cortisol output because her lifestyle was supportive of that. But the chemistry, the depletion had gone too far, but it had created this reverse output, so that instead of the cortisol being high during the day, which is what it's supposed to do to keep us going, and at its lowest point at night to allow us to sleep, it was in the reverse. So it was low during the day and high at night. And so progressively, right now we have a virtual program for insomnia. Specifically, we have a few specialties. You mentioned food craving, because my most recent book is called The Craving Cure, and it's about the epidemic of toxic food addiction and how we can break out of that, which is quite easy, by the way.
Yeah.
But the thing that we see is that people who call us at this point are quite sophisticated, and they've already gone through the types of insomnia that are more common, the tryptophan deficiency and Gaba deficiency, which we can also talk about. So they've tried to deal with all that, and it hasn't helped, and so they've kept looking, and they finally found us, and we send them out a salivary cortisol kit, and we're putting that on the internet, by the way, in our shop, so people can just order it for themselves. We were incredibly fortunate to be introduced to an amino acid. All of our nutrient heroes tend to be amino acids in terms of my work. Not all, but most. And so this is a very particular type of amino acid. And if you want me to go into how we get cortisol levels down, I'd be glad to do that, because
Yeah, please do.
probably
Please do.
most of your listeners, viewers, whatever, are in this category. They're sophisticated. They've tried, they've tested their vitamin D, which, by the way, I thought was a brilliant interview.
Thank you.
And they've and they failed for whatever reason. Other approaches just haven't worked. They've done melatonin, they've done tryptophan, they've done Gaba, and so, as I say, the minute they contact us, we arrange for a kit to be sent, and then as soon as it comes in and we see the expected profile, we we then arrange for them to get the amino acid that normalizes the situation. It suppresses, in a very nice way, the nighttime cortisol, and what we see is that the daytime levels start to rise. First of all, they get to sleep. That's obviously a boon for someone whose insomnia is based on excessive stress. And their daytime function improves remarkably. So we're able to reverse, this unhealthy pattern that was established because of the chronic daily stress in the past. And it usually takes effect within a few days. Sometimes,
few days?
Yes, sometimes
Wow.
the same night. This is the power of amino acids. It's a nutrient. Amino acids, all 20 of them are powerhouses. Each of them has extraordinary powers. So that when you take them, it's not like vitamins, where you're not sure when it might benefit you. Sometimes magnesium's right away, but otherwise, a lot of nutrients are just going on trust. You just don't know. But with amino acids, it's right away, or it's not going to happen, and it's almost always right away. So, for example, when you take melatonin, you usually, if you have a melatonin deficiency, you get response right away. But a lot of people will just take tryptophan, which is the precursor to melatonin, and that night they're asleep. But that's because they are deficient in tryptophan, which is very easy to be. We can talk about that later. But when it comes to the cortisol excess, this type of the amino acid I'm talking about is serine, but it's not phosphatidylserine, which is the form of serine that most supplements have, appeared in, and
Right.
it's very good for memory.
But that one's touted as a cortisol lower too, isn't it? Phosphatidylserine?
No, that's
It's
an
not.
error. It's also
Really?
It's originally touted as for memory and mental clarity, and it's quite good for that. But that's the opposite of what we want. We don't want people to be more alert.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work. The company that actually is the only source of the phosphorylated serine, which is what actually reduces levels of cortisol. They were persuaded, after the company had been very successful for 10 years, they got a new owner, and he was persuaded by the business advisor to use the phosphatidyl because it was much cheaper. And so he did, and he lost all of his business.
Just because of lack of response? Like because
Yes,
it wasn't working?
right.
Wow.
Right. And,
Wow.
and so he, returned it to the world, thank God. So it's called Seriphos, Seriphos. If anybody is interested, they can Google Seriphos and they'll get to, I think it's East West. I've forgotten the name of the company that produces it,
This is the phosphorylated serine that you say
Exactly.
lowers the cortisol effectively?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Wow.
so it starts working very quickly, and so then the question is, what kind of insomnia do you have? Do you have the I can't get to sleep? Do you have the I wake up in the night, or do you have both? And if you have both, then you might have to take it in the middle of the night for a while, but usually the bedtime dose takes care of the problem. But you individual variations, but it's the answer for over 80% of the insomniacs that we get.
And sorry, this is not tryptophan. This is the serine.
This is the serine.
Wow. It's that effective.
Yeah. So
That's
20%
fascinating.
of people have some other cause for their insomnia, And, in their case, it could be the vitamin D deficiency, not enough B12. But, typically it's low tryptophan, low Gaba, and too much coffee.
Yeah, well, that's just about everybody's problem. Now GABA, we've touched on this in previous episodes, and I'd love to get your experience with it. There is literature out there that says oral GABA supplementation does not cross the blood-brain barrier, or it is not well established if it does or if it does not. What do you say about this, Julia?
Well, I say that was one old study that was inaccurate. It's possible that you could test people who at the moment didn't need GABA, and after and so the body didn't absorb it. But there are a number of other studies now that show that it does cross the blood-brain barrier, and but we don't need studies. GABA is at very small doses is probably the most popular remedy for stress that we've ever come across.
And is it the pharma GABA that's the better one? Does it make a difference? I see pharma GABA, which is supposed to be more...
we haven't found it to be that effective.
Really?
We actually, having tried many, find that the Source Naturals product, which is sublingual, so it absorbs really well, at 125, it's a little bit stronger than pharma GABA, which is 100, but it's just unbelievable. I mean, within a minute, when we're with a client, on Zoom, we can watch their shoulders relax and their neck relax.
Really? It's
Yes.
that quick? That's fascinating.
It is. It's the most fun for me, and for my staff is to work with the aminos because, it's really a great experience to be with people who get relief right away. And it's not a flash in the pan. People take these things, whether it's Seriphos or GABA, until they don't need them anymore.
And are they easy to wean off of? Can you get dependent on these?
No, they are, nutrients known to the body. The body knows how to deal with them. The body's equipped with enzymes that destroy any excess. Keeping a balance, of GABA and serine, tryptophan, that's the body's business. That's why we like to use nutrients. We don't like to use herbs because they're very complex and mysterious, and quite often, surprisingly addictive. Let's take kava for an example. It's apparently experiencing a renaissance like now, but what nobody's saying is that in Fiji, it is a highly addictive substance. It's known to be dangerous, and it has the same feel because it's operating largely on the GABA receptors, but it's not like GABA itself. It plugs right in, it does what you need, it moves on, it doesn't build up. And
Wow.
if you are able and willing to eat a significant amount of protein 3 times a day, you will build up your own supplies and no longer be dependent on these nutrients within a few months.
So you talking? Does it need to be a animal protein diet that aids that, or just can it be plant-based protein as well?
Well, that's really the question of the hour. There's no question that, speaking of questions, that animal protein is much more robust a source of all of the amino acids.
Right.
So you might find most of them in a plant-based product, but not very much. So that means, eating a pound of garbanzo beans instead of a chicken breast.
Right.
So you can, you could conceivably do it, but it's very hard to get the balance right because plants just don't have, the robust. They aren't robust sources of all of the amino acids, and tryptophan is particularly hard to get even in animal protein. It's it's one of 20 amino acids, and 19 of them, even in animal protein, compose, like 2/3 of the contents of the meat, whereas tryptophan is like the runt. If you see a profile of all 20, you'll see that tryptophan's down towards the bottom. So it's a precious, tryptophan is a precious, very precious commodity, nutrient powerhouse, and it's hard to get enough. So there are many, vegans or vegetarians who are really working to get enough protein, but I don't know if you're aware of this, but a lot of the vegan protein powders are completely devoid of tryptophan.
Interesting.
And,
I didn't know that.
So are collagen powders, and so are the branched chain amino powders. And people are using them in great amounts, so they're creating a real imbalance. And it's pretty vocal voices on the internet talking about levels of depression among bodybuilders who are huge consumers of protein powders, and others. So we have to really be careful to get enough tryptophan, and the safest way is to use animal protein.
Right. And you, so walk me through this. Tryptophan is a precursor to, and you correct me if I'm wrong, you're the expert here, clearly. Tryptophan is a precursor to serotonin, which is then converted to melatonin. Is that the right pathway? Am I describing that right?
Well, there's one little step you missed. Tryptophan first converts into another form of itself called 5-hydroxytryptophan, 5-HTP, which is available also as a supplement. 5-HTP then converts directly into serotonin, and serotonin then in the late afternoon and evening starts converting into melatonin in the pituitary gland. So that's the source of melatonin, and it's why tryptophan works so well. We really we always ask people to start with tryptophan and maybe to take it alongside the melatonin, because the tryptophan pathway is so rich. It's not only the source of serotonin, which is our sunshine neurotransmitter, keeps us happy to be alive regardless.
Right.
But it also converts. It's the major source for niacin in the body, the vitamin B3, which is critical for practically innumerable interactions in the body and brain. And then, in addition to that, it converts into NAD. I don't know how familiar you and your audience is, but it's one of the most extraordinary and exciting body chemicals ever. And we're just really starting to understand it. And I happen to be very familiar with it because it's been used for over 20 years as a supplement to IV, and now sublingual or enteric-coated to help people detox.
I keep seeing it on shelves. Tell us about it, because I'm kind of in the dark on this. I don't know what it is. Talk about that.
Well, I don't really know what it is either, but it's. I was just trying to write a very concise description, and there's no way to do that. But the language that the scientists in the research papers on it are using are, kind of unprecedented. That it's absolutely essential for health, universally in in all mammals, it's the primary driver of the microbiome, just not the microbiome, the mitochondria, which is, what really makes all the cells work. But in terms of its applications, well, it sounds great, but it's so generalized, how or why would you use it as an individual supplement? And I can tell you that it's magic for helping people with difficult detoxes. And one of the reasons that I wanted to bring this up while we were talking was that benzodiazepine addiction is perhaps the most difficult addiction to withdraw from. And NAD is one of the most helpful new additions to the benzodiazepine withdrawal process, along with Seriphos. Because one of the things that happens as soon as withdrawal discomfort arises, whether you're withdrawing from opiates or tobacco or whatever, is that you get highly stressed and cortisol levels rise. Well, in the case of insomniacs who are most likely to be addicted to benzodiazepines, their cortisol at night is already too high. That's why they need benzodiazepines, drug to drag down the cortisol for a certain number of hours, and then of course it rebounds.
So the benzos artificially lower cortisol?
Yes.
Okay. And so, that's interesting that you touch on benzos. I know that with those, not from my own personal experience, but just from research and reading, dependency kicks in very quickly with those, and pretty soon you can't sleep without them. So is it related to its interaction with cortisol?
Yes, it is. And so it's critical to bring those cortisol levels down in order to get off the benzo. And so as part of the withdrawal, one of the great, so we've got these two great new assists. One is Seriphos and one is NAD.
I can't wait to read up on that Seriphos. I've never even heard of that. That's wild. That's great. I'm glad you brought that up.
Let me know if you find much. I had a lot of communication with the man who developed it, who himself, struggled with pretty severe insomnia, and discovered that this was the key for him and for so many other people. He unfortunately died about 5 years ago. But I think this was his, contribution to the world.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know about writing. I don't think he wrote about it.
Now, what about sleep duration insomnia, Julia? Like, what about people who can only sleep sometimes 4 hours a night? They get to sleep okay, but they wake up either in the middle of the night or they can't get that, 7 hours that we're all told we should have. What are your thoughts on that? What can help people sleep longer, and what's cutting our duration down?
Well, the same thing. That's where the salivary testing comes in handy. So we do a bedtime collection and we do a middle of the night collection when the person is waking up unnaturally. And usually their cortisol is elevated, is above normal whenever they can't sleep, whether it's, first thing trying to get to sleep or whether it's in the middle of the night when they're waking up inappropriately. So the Seriphos that's why it's such an extraordinary save, because people can take tryptophan and sometimes that's why they can't get to sleep, or melatonin, so they get to sleep but they still wake up in the middle of the night.
Right.
And taking tryptophan or melatonin sometimes helps in the middle of the night. But when it doesn't, we almost don't have to test, because what else, it always turns out to be a serotonin spike.
So when you say a serotonin spike, what do you mean by that? Too much serotonin, not enough melatonin?
Oh, I'm sorry. Not a serotonin spike. A cortisol spike.
Oh, got you. Okay.
Thank you for bringing me back to reality here.
Hey, I haven't been in reality in years, so. Now, you mentioned serotonin. Is there a lab that exists or some way to measure our serotonin levels? Is that a thing that you know of?
Yes. Plasma testing, the big labs do it, and my favorite lab does it very reasonably, although it's not insurance reimbursable, but it's like, well, it's reasonable. And that's Health Diagnostics in New Jersey.
Okay.
Now, you have to get a health professional to order the testing for you, but that's the only hurdle. And so then they do the most accurate testing available in any lab that I know of, and that's, so cerebrospinal fluid is the most accurate testing, but nobody wants to donate any of their cerebrospinal fluid. So for serotonin and for the catecholamines, the stimulating amino acids, dopamine, norepinephrine, and adrenaline, blood platelet testing. The blood platelets transport those specific neurotransmitters, and so this lab tests for those substances in blood platelets. I don't know any other lab that's doing it. They should all do it, but the conventional labs will do the same amino acids and others. So again, it's pricey, but it can be accessed.
Yeah.
From conventional labs.
Yeah. And what about melatonin? Does that become habit forming if you're just taking melatonin? Is that something that somebody you think can take safely over a period of time, or is the goal to get more balanced so that we just produce it ourselves? What's your take on that?
That's our goal, but it is possible with age, particularly, or for other reasons that aren't terribly clear to me anyway, that our capacity to make it, even if we supply the precursor tryptophan and 5-HTP, and our sleep hygiene is excellent and so forth. Some people just don't seem to be able to do it, but for people that don't have the high cortisol insomnia, who do respond to melatonin, most of them are able to get off of it because their own supplies, pick up, their own melatonin output picks up, and they've stopped doing the things that set them up for inadequate melatonin in the first place. They're not doing bright light at night, they're not exercising at night, and they're eating enough protein to supply themselves with the amino acids that are needed to really service every cell in the body.
Yeah, it's amazing what your body can do when you're younger, and I'll speak to that. I used to go to the gym at night, sometimes late at night, when I was in my 20s. I'd come home and I would sleep fine. If I did that now, I'd be up all night. I don't know about you. I couldn't pull that off now. There's no way.
Right.
Now, we talked a lot about nutritional components, and clearly those have a primary place in approaches to insomnia. But, there's that segment of practitioners out there, the cognitive behavior therapists, who say that sleep deprivation can sometimes be a mental thing, not physiological. Is there any truth to that? Do you think that there's a mental component to sleep disruptions, or do you think we can usually tackle it using a physiological hands-on approach with nutraceuticals like the ones you described?
Well, there is no such distinction. Mental is physiological.
Yeah, I guess.
I don't think that it's possible to ignore the physiology. I think there are a lot of ways of trying to relax, but if the person's physiological function is deeply compromised, it's not going to be very successful in my experience. That's why we focus so much on the amino acids that are the precursors to calming neurotransmitters like Gaba and serotonin and the serine that allows the brain and adrenals to regulate cortisol properly.
So what does a person do if they're been hooked on sleeping pills for so many years?
You're reading my mind. I was just thinking we can't stop without talking more about sleeping pill addiction.
No, please tell us what you know.
So, one of the things, of course, is that a lot of people aren't told how addictive these drugs are. And, they might as well shoot them as to get them addicted to it. But now that we have these additional tools, there's a way out. And I want to mention one of the heroines of the benzodiazepine addiction fight, the fight against benzodiazepine addiction. And she's a British physician named Heather Ashton. And it's all over the internet. She, years ago, she's an expert in benzodiazepine addiction, wrote a handbook for the withdrawal from it, which also has a lot of great information just about how it works. And it's called the Ashton Manual. And so her expertise was in creating a manual to allow people to taper down off of a less addictive benzo, typically Valium, that has a longer half-life, that doesn't create the emergency every 24 hours. So it's a smoother ride down with the tapering doses, and we can augment it with Gaba, with tryptophan, and with Seriphos. We can also utilize the oral form of NAD, which is so extraordinarily helpful in easing withdrawal. NAD, however, is easily destroyed by stomach acid.
Too much or too little?
Too much stomach acid. And not too much. Ordinary amounts will destroy a tablet or a capsule of NAD. So we want to use sublingual forms of it, or the enteric-coated form, which is only available through Monteith, which is a company, the pioneering company providing amino acids for therapeutic use. Montiff. So with these tools at hand, it means that there's real hope for withdrawal, and it can be slow and gradual. I helped someone withdraw some years ago. We were both in the addiction treatment field, and she had a lot of hereditary ailments and so forth, and I can't remember, why she got addicted to benzos. It was a medical, prescription addiction. But she got a new doctor, 10 years later, who said, you have to get off of this stuff, and I'm going to start tapering you down now. And she, went through hell, and, for 10 days or longer in between dropping the doses. And we used IV aminos to calm the situation down with high vitamin C, and in this case we use taurine rather than GABA. GABA is great orally, but IV, it causes a second or two of respiratory arrest, which I don't approve of. So,
What, IV GABA does that?
yeah.
Wow. Why? Does it just relax the respiratory muscles?
I guess so. I really don't know.
That's a little scary.
It was a surprise to me because I've been using it for years when we started doing some IV work and found that everybody was having this experience.
Wow.
And I asked the physician who had pioneered the use of GABA and a number of other aminos for addiction detox, and he said, "Oh yeah, but we tell them it's going to happen, and it never continues. It's just a second or two." So
that still sounds a little scary to me.
yeah, and taurine is very similar to GABA, and it works just fine without that. So we used that, and she had no problem at all withdrawing from that benzo. So a lot of people are, going to practitioners who do IV withdrawal, and I don't, there's obviously a tremendous variation in their ability to do it well, but there was a famous physician, he was American, but he set up a practice that became famous worldwide right over the border in Mexico. And it was 6 to 10 days, and he could detox anybody from anything. And that's because he was using IV amino acids and NAD.
Wow.
His name was William Hitt.
And it's fascinating that you brought up taurine because we did a whole episode on taurine. I don't know if you had a chance to catch
really?
that. We did, yeah. And it's a fascinating amino. I mean, I've had a lot of positive experience with it myself during high stress times. It really takes the pressure off in a healthy, non-addictive way. And if you stop it after taking it for months, there's no withdrawal. It's fantastic. I love taurine.
Well, have you used GABA?
I have personally, and I haven't had a lot of success with it. Now, I've used the pharma GABA, and I didn't have much response to it. I find it gives
that's why we don't use it. There's something wrong with the formula, I think.
Yeah.
It should work.
Yeah.
But we're so used to, as I was describing, this product at about the same strength that has an instant response. We don't use taurine so much because we found that, not that there's anything wrong with taurine, but we found that theanine will produce something identical to GABA in the 10% or so of people who don't respond wonderfully to GABA.
Interesting.
And however, it's on the list.
Yeah.
If one of the GABA or theanine don't work, then taurine's next.
It's funny that you say theanine. I tried L-theanine years ago, and it was the strangest thing. I had come down with this weird 1 or 2 day case of sleep apnea where I would just stop breathing and I couldn't get to sleep. And that was the only thing I changed in my whole protocol. And maybe I just have this unique biology, but I was always scared to touch L-theanine again after that. So I've stayed away from it. I thought maybe it relaxed me too much, or it just...
No, I would stay away from it too. Anytime we see somebody having an adverse reaction, even if they're all also getting benefit, we absolutely take them off.
Yeah, that's wise.
And we find an alternative.
Yeah, definitely.
Or we lower the dose, or we do something.
Yeah.
We take them off of it, and then we may reintroduce at a half dose, or we may just give them an alternative.
Yeah, it happened 15 years ago, never happened again. And so I've seen it on the shelves, and I was like, I keep reading great things about this, but yeah, I'm with you. If something's not working, don't take it.
You don't need to. Taurine is working for you.
It is. Taurine's like amazing. So Julia, how can people get plugged into your program? They can't sleep. They're trying to find a viable alternative to the traditional approaches. How do people get plugged into what you're doing?
They can go to my website, Julia Ross Cures. All of my books, The Diet Cure, The Mood Cure, and The Craving Cure, all have the word cure. So all of my books, my clinic, the supplement supply, testing supply shop, and our training program for health professionals is all centered there, along with the books, at juliarosscures.com.
We'll put that in the show notes as well, just so people can see it, Julia.
Great.
Well, thanks for being here. This has
You're
been a lot of
welcome.
fun, and I'd love to have you back. You have a lot of great insights to share, and I think our listeners could really benefit from it.
Well, thank you. I'd be delighted to come back.
Well, we look forward to it. Thanks so much.
You're
And
welcome.
that'll do it for this edition of the Natural Man Podcast. Check us out online, naturalmanpodcast.com. And until next time, I'm Mike C. Stay healthy.
The Natural Man Podcast. Check us out, naturalmanpodcast.com.